So Fox Sports Joel Klatt, who calls a lot of the Big Ten games and has called Michigan quite a few times this season, had an interesting comment earlier this week on Colin Cowherd's show. And here's what he had to say, among other things. He said, Georgia was lulled to sleep. They were not tested. And basically saying that was the reason why they lost to Alabama. So is that something that you believe too? I mean, when you look at the start of Georgia's season, it did look, I think Joel Klatt's right to some degree, which is that, Georgia couldn't have expected, and no one really could have, that Clemson would have fallen off the way they did, but they did. That Florida would have fallen off the way they did, but they did. With that said, you do see a lot of this stuff when anyone loses, and I remember it was not so dissimilar when Alabama lost to Texas A&M earlier this season, and there's a touch of overreaction that always comes out. Georgia played three games in a row where they were playing a ranked team. I'm not sure how many teams in the country have done that, and I'm not sure anyone who was there that night would say that the Clemson game was Georgia not being tested. That Come on. So after a while, what we do is nothing is good enough unless you are either Alabama or the team that beats Alabama. And the team that beat Alabama this year is going to a bowl. I don't even know where Texas A&M is going to a bowl game, but they were not a great team this season. I don't know if they were good, but um, you know, are we going to do this with Michigan too? I mean, are we going to do this with Cincinnati that they weren't tested? Of course, Cincinnati was tested. They went on the road and beat Notre Dame. I mean, does that count for nothing? Um, I'm not saying that there's not some reality in what he said. I'm just the sweeping stroke of what happens often is that folks get so carried away after losses that nothing that a team did before that is and it's just after losses. A week or two later, they don't do the same shtick, but uh, excuse me. This is what we do is no matter how a team lost or whatever it is, it's that they didn't play anybody before that. And so it's what you expect kind of in October and December. I mean, are we really going to do this? I mean, like they played nobody. You know let's not kind of do that. I mean, Alabama played the same teams Georgia did with the exception of LSU, I guess. I mean, in Miami, like you know, if we're going to play that game, everybody that Alabama played in the West that was good, maybe with the exception of Mississippi, is who Georgia played. I mean, they played Arkansas, they played Auburn. I mean, what are we talking? I mean, Florida. They both played Florida. They both played Tennessee. That's half their conference schedule right there. They both had the same four opponents. So is this based on Alabama's win over Mississippi? I mean, that was a really good win. But I think generally speaking, this is sort of what we do. Georgia was lulled to sleep. They weren't tested. Well, I'm not going to cuss. It's just not reality based. They were not tested as much as Ohio State was at the end of the season. They were not tested as much as Michigan was at the end of the season. But with that said, um, you know, it to some degree that statement, while halfway true, is not relevant. Frankly, it may be an explanation as to the reason why they did not beat Alabama on that day. But what is the explanation for why Michigan lost to Michigan State? Or why Alabama lost to Texas A&M? There are going to be times when you lose games, and there are going to be times, often, when folks in the media overreact to these things. Now, on top of that, he pulled back and said, I would probably pick Georgia to beat Michigan. I think everybody is, I don't think it's abnormal to pick Michigan in this game. I do want to hear the reason why. Um, and I obviously don't think it would be abnormal to pick Georgia. They're an 8-point favorite in this game. So um, to me, it is. it is easy to talk about teams after they lose having not been tested. Let me just go back to the Alabama discussion. Nobody, the criticism of Alabama is few and far between. But boy, when they lose, they get murdered. And after that Texas A&M game, that's what we saw. Well, they beat Florida. Florida's not real good. They played well against Mississippi. Da, 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 da. But I mean, Alabama was tested against Tennessee, I guess, tested against LSU, tested against Arkansas, tested against Auburn. Georgia wasn't tested against Auburn. They beat their brains in. I mean, that wasn't a test for them. They weren't tested by Arkansas. They beat their brains in. They weren't really tested by Tennessee. They beat their brains in. And they weren't tested by the Gators. They beat their brains in. No, Georgia was not tested by Miami, and neither was Alabama. No, Georgia did not play Mississippi. Um, am I missing something else here? I mean, I'm all for living in reality. I am. It doesn't bother me, but I think we actually have to live in reality when we're making these criticisms. Georgia didn't play well, and they played the one team that if you don't play well, you're going to lose. Okay, that's what happened. I think maybe with the exception of the Ole Miss game, I guess everybody that Alabama faced they probably got their best, well, and Georgia probably got their best shot of the season. So it's something that Alabama is used to for sure. It's something that Georgia gets a lot. I'm not sure they're used to that. What happens if Georgia plays its best game of the season against Alabama in the future? What happens if Georgia plays its best game against Michigan? I mean, like, if Georgia beats Michigan by 17, will the narrative be that they didn't get tested or that they beat Michigan's brains in? If Michigan wins by 21 over Georgia, will the narrative be that Michigan wasn't tested by Georgia or that, the Big Ten is so much better than the SEC? I thought the Big Ten was in a position to make the claim that they were just as good, if not better, as a league. But as it's turned out, as the season has sort of progressed, we can't really say that. Penn State, face flopping as usual. This is what they do. Congratulations to Penn State's administration for extending James Franklin for another boondoggle. Michigan State, I think, is a good team, but had just a tough loss to Ohio State. They just got their brains beat in. It happens. I think we've seen that before. So none of this criticism will go away until Georgia wins the national championship. I mean, that's what it is. And then as soon as you win the national championship, the next criticism will come. There's been plenty of criticism lately for Dabo Swinney. Well, when you have a subpar season, 9-3, I mean, and I'm sorry, you don't really get a lot of credit for that. This is what you're going to get. When Alabama went 10-3, nobody was. I mean, I remember people talking about how they were dead. No, they're not dead. They're not going to die anytime soon. But it is curious to see the discussion points that are out there. Hot takes. I'm not sure if that's a total hot take, but Georgia was tested. They just passed every single test until the last one by a lot. And, I don't think they should apologize for that. They just need to get to work on what they got to do to beat the Michigan Wolverines. We'll see you over on the website.